Welcome to the RJI Futures Lab, where we help you make your organization more innovative. I'm Reuben Stern. This week, a community engagement tool for mobile phones and correcting the record in social media. Before the wide adoption of social media, the Public Insight Network was one of the first online platforms for enlisting audience members to help inform news coverage. Now, one of its founders has created a new service designed to help newsrooms partner with their communities via mobile phones. Futures Lab reporter Katie Mersman explains this new tool called GroundSource.
GroundSource works by allowing newsrooms to sign up for a phone number that can be used to send text message surveys to sources.
So it's a way for them to reach out to their community, to ask them questions, to get them involved. And it's a way for people on the ground to share information through SMS, text messaging, or phone calls. We think we've eliminated or lowered a lot of the barriers to engagement that news organizations have. The platform allows organizations to set up a phone number in their community that people can text or call into, and then use it in all kinds of different ways. They could set up surveys and have people text in and take a short survey, 2 or 3 questions.
The Public Insight Network used emailed web forms to communicate with sources, but the responses typically only came from sources who had time to fill out the forms and understood the value of communicating with newsrooms.
Our hypothesis, which has started to prove itself out, is that if you make a much simpler way to communicate that's much more natural, and texting, aside from having a face-to-face conversation, is one of the most natural ways to communicate.
GroundSource also allows newsrooms to keep databases of sources they've communicated with in the past, making back-and-forth communication easier.
As you learn more about your sources, you can start to filter those by demographics. You can even geofence it, so you can draw a circle or a rectangle or a line around a certain neighborhood or a geographic area that you want to communicate with. And once you've got a group of sources selected, then you send that survey out to them. I see newsrooms not only using this as a sourcing tool, but also as an audience research and understanding tool. I mean, the whole philosophy of what we're doing is that we want to make organizations more responsive to the needs of their communities.
For the Futures Lab, this is Katie Mersman.
GroundSource is also being offered to nonprofit organizations as a way to communicate with their constituents. Delivering news via social channels like Twitter and Facebook has brought about some creative approaches to an old problem. How do you correct the record when a mistake gets out? Futures Lab reporter Tatiana Daria presents a few ideas.
On a Saturday night, Slate made a funny, embarrassing error on Twitter, but they fixed it. Here's how.
If there's an event where we do happen to make an error, then we will simply reply to the original tweet and state what the correction was, so that people who are following Slate and people who probably saw that initial error also will see that correction. And that also takes advantage of Twitter's conversations timeline change, so that the 2 tweets are in succession in someone's timeline.
The simple strategy on Twitter seems to be working for Slate. This particular correction was shared nearly 3 times more than the original tweet.
In some ways, you benefit by not deleting that initial tweet because it might not have a negative effect on traffic. Sometimes it's positive. I think the benefit to it is that people who follow you can see both tweets in context. Previously, we were doing a separate tweet that said correction, but the problem with that is that people who didn't necessarily see the first tweet won't know what the correction is really referring to, and then people who did see the first tweet and maybe noticed the error might not notice that you issued the correction.
On Facebook, corrections are treated differently, says Lindsey Underwood. Unlike Twitter, you can edit or hide your posts. But when it comes to corrections on the web, Craig Silverman, who runs a Poynter Institute blog on media accuracy, says journalists should own up to their mistakes and make sure to spread a correction as far as the original wrong information.
And so that means being willing to stand up and say, hey, that article I wrote earlier today has been corrected for this. You know, to say that on Twitter, to say that on Facebook. So one of the things that I tell journalists is you want to match the distribution channels of the correction to the same distribution channels that you use to kind of promote the article itself. And this is actually a bit of behavior that builds trust rather than destroys it. I think there are too many journalists who think that corrections are a bad thing, who think that corrections are going to hurt their standing. It's actually the opposite. The more we're willing to admit our mistakes, the more that people are willing to trust us.
For the Futures Lab, this is Tatiana Doria.
And that's it for this report from the RJI Futures Lab. I'm Reuben Stern. We'll see you in the future.